Hi, it's me, Oxey. It's been a long while since I last made a video. Last time it happened, I was speaking French and probably talking about making games. And since then, a lot has happened to me. I graduated from high school and I'm entering the first year of university to get a computer science degree, and for the past 6 months or so, I've been working on a little arcade game for Playdate called DockerMaster. It's a game about putting containers on ships in a safe and orderly way, but it can quickly devolve into a race against time if you make too many mistakes. DockerMaster is inspired by the best arcade titles I've played. Tetris was a big inspiration, of course, but more recent ones came from the Playdate community, such as heere. And now that my game is finally released, I figured I could try to lay down the design process a little bit to try and see what I did right, what I did wrong, and what I can do and learn for future games I'll be making. When designing a game, I always start with the gameplay. The idea for DockerMaster came from a half as interesting video talking about the thousands of rules that govern placement of containers in real-life ships. I figured this would make one hell of a Tetris, and I thought I could try to prototype a game mechanic from that. When it comes to finding inspiration, trying to look for an interesting challenge that we face in the real world is always a good idea. Unlike me, however, you have to keep in mind that keeping it simple is sometimes way better. If your game can't be explained in 2 to 3 sentences, then it's probably too complex to be built alone. The best kind of game design is when your game's challenge feels instinctive, for instance, root bear. Then you don't have to create any tutorial, and the player can directly transpose their real-world knowledge and get in the zone quicker. Now, I've come to realize that most of the greatest games I've ever played derive their complexity from their surprisingly simple rules. These rules can be interactions between objects, like how in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, the devs made sure that everything was physics-based and quote-unquote chemically based, so that using a fire sword or other flammable materials would cause the fire to propagate, or bringing it next to an explosive barrel would make said barrel explode and blast out nearby objects and enemies. But those rules can also be about how you fundamentally interact with the game. In Hexa, you only have one move, but you can apply this move everywhere, and it has a significant impact all across the very small board, so you'll have to be very strategic, yet very quick in your decision making. And the same goes for Tetris, where the more you play, the more your mistakes from 5 minutes ago come back to haunt you and ultimately cause you to lose. Combining both approaches makes your game's mechanic way deeper, because imaginative solutions are often derived from seemingly restrictive constraints, and your players will always be able to find the most mind-boggling strategies to reach that new high score they've been trying to hit for the last 45 minutes. With DockerMaster, the fact that the more containers you have, the less control you will have on what has come before forces you to make strategies, plan for the future, and it also teaches you a little bit about stack management. Combine that with the placing requirements, and some situations will leave you scrambling for a solution as the timer draws ever closer to zero. But this timer is also one of the most fundamental mistakes I think I've made in this game. Because at first I thought that infinite gameplay wasn't ideal. I thought that having no score limit would be a bad thing. I spent a significant amount of time trying to work out the best formula to calculate exactly how much time I should give to the player depending on how well they're doing and how much time remains, but ultimately no solution is perfect. And this makes me think about why timers exist in arcade games in the first place. Before we played our games home, we used to go to the little arcade, where you would pay per try on the game. game devs had to make sure that the arcade owners got their money's worth, and so time limits artificially made you spend more of this precious pocket money on that one addictive game you couldn't leave alone. I realize now that a lot of modern arcade games don't have time constraints, and that's because the artificial pressure it creates isn't always needed. To explore this, I've decided to work on a quote-unquote chill mode. In this mode, you can choose to play with no lives, no timers, or even no types at all. One thing that helped a lot during development was playtesting. I would send builds to friends in the Playdate community to try and see their reactions and their feedback, which was decisive in the way I designed the game. Not only in terms of gameplay, but also in terms of graphics and sound design. If your prototype turns out to be interesting and you want to turn it into a full-fledged game, you must find playtesters. And the Playdate community contains a lot of passionate gamers and game designers ready to give you their feedback because no one declines a free video game. Coming back to design, I want to talk a bit about the graphical aspect of game making. In early versions of DockerMaster, the containers looked very similar, with only the icon and the very small text changing. One playtester, Franchovy, suggested having clearly identifiable patterns on containers, and that's what I ended up doing. And this is a good idea because it makes the game more accessible to everyone. The Playdate doesn't have any color, but in any games you make, consider having distinct patterns, big fonts, and other options for the visually impaired players. Now, on the sound design aspect of DockerMaster, my biggest achievement was to create a realistic C sounds generator. The way it works is surprisingly simple, yet, in my humble opinion, pretty clever. To avoid repetitive sounds, try layering multiple bass effects together. The wave sound generator in DockerMaster takes a few foreground and background white noise samples and layers 2 or 3 at a time, creating the illusion of waves crashing against the shoreline. The system obeys a few rules to make sure that it sounds as authentic as possible. 1. Have 2 tracks, background and foreground, play in spaced intervals. 2. Never repeat the same bass sample twice in a row. 3. Slightly randomize the pacing between 2 samples playing on each track. And 4. Vary the pitch slightly for each sample played. Combine random layering with pitch randomization, and you can make most ambient sounds last infinitely and without obvious repetition. If you think about it, a windy ambience works in kind of the same way. As a sound designer, you have to imagine the sort of logic behind the sound, not only the samples themselves, but also how you play the samples. Another important aspect of game design is how the game feels. I took a page out of Balletro's book for this, and it influenced many little details of the game. First, the UI, which uses shaking for the mistakes counter and a smoothly animated counter for the score. Also notice the way each container's score is counted with a slight delay. This is also an important part of what makes sending out a shipment so satisfying in my opinion. Those might seem like little details to you, but they are primordial in making the game feel polished. But game feel is also about how you handle inputs. Early versions of the game felt very stiff to play because of the way inputs were handled. The crane animations meant that you couldn't move while picking a container up, and often you'd press a direction only for the input to be ignored. This has been talked about countless times by excellent videos from Game Maker's Toolkit, Gymnasty Roller, and many more game devs. and the technique used to solve this problem is called input buffering. As the name implies, it consists in buffering, or in other words, saving the input for a few frames if the action it is meant to do is currently undoable. I found myself struggling a lot with optimization for DockerMaster. Mainly because a lot of effects like the waves, the chimney smoke, and the score particles take a lot of CPU power to render. The solution against this is pretty simple yet very elegant: pre-rendering. The Playdate SDK lets you easily render once to a texture, an image, and then you can use that image as a sprite. This demands significantly less work for the CPU, since it turns a complex process into a simple read and write mode. The one struggle I had with this was with the XR effect, but the fix was simply to use the setImageDrawMount method in the custom draw function for the water sprite. And some more coding tips. Try to make extensive use of the class system the Playdate SDK provides, and in general, try to keep your games object-oriented as much as possible. This simplifies the process a lot. You can make use of Playdate's built-in sprite system, which offers an extensive set of tools like rendering, physics, and more. Unlike me, try to segment your features into functions as much as possible, because otherwise you will end up like me with a big chunk of code that becomes unreadable. You also want to avoid magic numbers and define a lot of constants. This will make tweaking a lot less cumbersome. Also try to define enums, which you can do in Lua using the LuaCats annotation system, if you're thinking of anything that could have a restrained set of values. In general, if you are coding with Lua on the Playdate, I would highly recommend you take a look in Playdate LuaCats. I will leave links to useful resources I use down in the description. And with that, I think I did a pretty good overview of my journey making DockerMaster. If you're ever going to make a game, try to take notes and keep records of your decisions somewhere. It doesn't need to be organized well, but it should be somewhere you can read back later. Avoid Discord because it's kind of a mess to search through, and prefer something like a good text editor. If you have any questions about the design process in general, I'd love to give my opinion in the comments, or you can go on the Playdate Squad Discord server, link in the description, to chat with an amazing community of passionate folks. You can find a non-exhaustive list of what I do on my website, oxay405.com, and yeah, that's all for today. See you in 4 years, bye!